Hi Year 13, this lecture's about gender and crime. So data from official statistics and self-report studies on offenders, okay, so think self-report is a different research method that can make up for the deficiencies in relying on official statistics. These show that women commit fewer crimes than men, that women commit less serious offences, and women are actually less likely to re-offend. So have a think about what sorts of offences do you think women are commonly arrested for, or the first theory is the sex role theory. Okay, this is a functionalist argument, the argument that socialisation, and from infancy, children are socialised into two different sexes. Female roles contain such elements as caring, passivity, and domesticity. You could also argue that agents of socialisation like religion favour those sorts of characteristics in women, whereas men or boys are socialised with sort of traits of toughness, aggressiveness, and sexual conquest. It is argued that females generally lack the values that are typically associated with delinquency, that we are not aggressive, that we are not competitive, that we are not greedy and lustful. However, the increased number of ladettes is a good AO2 point against this argument. Women are starting to behave slightly more masculinely and dressing and swearing and drinking just like men. Just to recap control theory, it's a theory that humans act rationally and conform to social norms in return for rewards. People will commit crime if the rewards for conforming aren't good enough, or the rewards of the crime outweigh the risks. It's a branch of right realism. Pat Carlin wrote about class and gender deals, and she argued that women only commit crime if their class or gender deal has been broken. She did some research in prison. She interviewed female convicts to try and figure out what was it that led to them committing crimes. She argued that the class deal offers rewards from hard work, while the gender deal offers rewards from their roles as wife and mother. So why do you think working class women are less likely to benefit from these types of deals? So why don't they get rewarded from hard work? And why might they not get rewarded as a wife or a mother? Okay, so consider how hard they might have to work for very low pay, and the fact that they're more likely to be victims of domestic violence, they're much more likely to be lone parent families. So if they don't get the deal, then they're more likely to commit crime. There are a couple of criticisms to make of Hindson and Carlin's approach. Both feminism and control theory are overly deterministic and ignore the role of free will. And don't forget, Carlin's sample was far too narrow. She only focused on working class crime of women and, like many feminists and other structural theories, ignored white-collar crime. Frida Adler tried to explain why some women were starting to commit crime, okay? And she argued that as men and women have become more equal or more similar, women, as a result, are taking part in crimes that were typically associated with men. So In what ways are women's lives now more similar to men? And how might this explain an increase in female crime? She pointed out to women taking part in male crimes such as embezzlement and armed robbery. Now, embezzlement is associated with a work-related crime, so what social changes have gone on for women to embezzle. And a more recent bit of research, because Frida Adler in 1975 was quite a long time ago, Denscombe found out that teenage girls were concerned with looking hard and so adopted male behaviour to join certain gangs. Criticisms again. Adler overemphasises the extent women have been liberated and the impact this has had on their involvement in crime. Apparently, most female criminals are working class, and they are least, and the working class are the ones that are least influenced by feminism or liberation. And generally, women did deal in drugs, but this was linked to prostitution, and prostitution is a crime that's dominated by male pimps. So women are not liberated, they're actually further subjugated by men. And Laidler and Hunt challenged Denscombe's findings and said actually the female gang members tended to conform to conventional gender roles. So they would have sex, they would, with all the male members, they would dress a little bit revealingly. They would play the weaker roles in the gang, the spies, so they wouldn't get involved in the physical fighting side of the gang behaviour. Another area to look at is gender in the criminal justice system. There are two opposing views of the way women are treated in the courts. Anne Campbell proposed the chivalry thesis, and Frances Heinsohn argued that actually there was double deviance. Now, we did talk about this a couple of months ago. Can you find any evidence to support the chivalry thesis or double deviance in your textbook? Okay, so just remind yourself of what the chivalry thesis was and what the double deviance argument was, and how do they disagree with one another. The other focus is victims. Now, this is where many feminists in crime and deviance focus their work, and there's a horrible statistic that 1 in 3 women in the world will be raped, killed, or beaten. Okay, it's called the 1 billion and rising statistic. If you Google 1 billion rising video on YouTube, there's a great clip to look at that talks about the sorts of abuse women suffer. Carol Smart argued that feminists should be very concerned with the harm that women suffer as a result of crime. The British Crime Survey in 2008 showed that 5.7% of men and 3.3% of women aged 25 to 34 have been victims of at least one violent crime in the previous 12 months. What difference do you think there was between the violent crime that men were victim to and the violent crime that women were subject to? Men are much more likely to be victims of a violent attack by complete strangers in public spaces. 78% of victims of stranger violence were men. Why do you think this is? And it's something to do with where they spend their leisure time. Women are much more likely to be victims of violent attacks by someone they know in their own home. Okay, so what sort of circumstances might lead to that? And what picture does the media paint of where we're more likely to become victims of crime? And does the media try and create a sense of fear against stranger danger as opposed to the people we spend all our time with? We can focus on domestic violence. We did look at this in the family unit last year. The majority of crimes against women are carried out by men and include the use of violence. Okay, and here's some horrible statistics. If you remember, Dobash and Dobash explained domestic violence in terms of an extension of patriarchal control in the home. It was arguably something to do with the marriage ceremony, where the woman was seen as the man's property, and if at any point she challenged the male authority, maybe over bills or what he was spending his money on or disagreed, that was when they'd assert their patriarchal control by using physical violence because their financial control may have been slipping. Okay. What's key to know is crimes against women are subject to severe and significant underreporting. Why do you think women are unlikely to report violence against them that's committed by people that they live with? Why? You can't talk about women as victims without considering the case of rape, as awful as it is. In 2001, the Home Office reported that 1 in 20 women between 16 and 60 had been raped
and 45% of those had been by their current partners. Now remember, it wasn't until 2001 marital rape was actually outlawed in Britain, which is a real shocking fact. What's terrible about rape as a crime is the conviction and sentencing rate is so enormously low. Most of the time it's because victims actually withdraw their account and withdraw their charges because they are so scared of being not believed and of the criminal justice system. Now, I know we spoke about this in lesson, but when it comes to rape trials, it's normally one person's word against the others, and the man's lawyer will try and paint the woman as behaving as sluttily as possible and possibly asking for it, which is a really horrible experience to go through, especially if your friends and family have turned out to support you in court. Arguably, rape has nothing to do with sexual desire, but about asserting power and dominance and toughness. These are all very masculine characteristics, possibly linked back to the socialisation argument that we started off with. And Susan Brown-Miller argues that rape is part of the male system of intimidation of women and keeping them in fear and controlling them. Okay, so just to summarise some of the arguments we've been looking at just now. We're going to go on to look at the crisis of masculinity, and arguably you might want to look at the feminisation of the workforce and what this has had, what effect this has had, particularly at home, with men being unable to dominate the workplace. They're kind of reasserting their masculine identity at home, and the sexual objectification of women and seeing women as property. Think about magazines like Nuts, which I know is now closed down, but things like those, and The Sun, page 3. Like, what does that do for crime against women?